I walked into my garage and stopped dead. The door to my late wife's painting studio was wide open. Not just unlocked wide open, the way you leave a room when you're done with it for good. I stood in the doorway for a long moment. The smell hit me first. Fresh paint. Not the oil paint and linseed oil smell I'd lived with for 31 years of marriage. Latex. Wall paint. The kind that comes in a 5-gallon bucket from Home Depot. The canvases were gone. Every single one of them. Margaret had painted in that room for the last 11 years of her life. Landscapes, mostly. The Oregon coast. The Columbia River Gorge. A series of paintings of our backyard through the 4 seasons that she never quite finished. The walls had been covered floor to ceiling with her work, some framed, some just tacked up with pushpins, some stacked in careful rows against the baseboards. Her easel stood in the corner by the window because that's where the afternoon light came in just right. Her brushes were organized in mason jars by size. Her palette knives hung on a pegboard she'd asked me to build for her our second Christmas in this house. All of it was gone. The walls were white, a bright, aggressive white, the kind that has no memory. I walked in slowly, the way you walk into a room after an accident. The hardwood floor, the floor I'd refinished myself the summer after Margaret passed, because working with my hands was the only way I knew how to get through those first months, had been covered with a gray foam mat, the kind used in children's play areas. Interlocking squares of it, edge to edge, wall to wall. Hiding the floor, I'd spent 2 weeks on my knees sanding. In the corner where the easel used to be, there was a treadmill, a brand new treadmill, still with the manufacturer's sticker on the display panel. I recognized it. My son had mentioned wanting one back in the fall. My daughter-in-law had shown me a photo of it on her phone at Thanksgiving, said they'd been thinking about getting healthier. I'd nodded and said that sounded like a good idea, thinking they meant for their own place, the apartment they were supposedly going to move into sometime in the spring. That was 8 months ago. I'm 63 years old. I spent 34 years as a civil engineer, the last 12 of them running my own small firm before I sold it and retired. I've managed construction projects, negotiated contracts, dealt with city planners and county commissioners and contractors who thought they could cut corners on load-bearing walls. I'm not a man who gets flustered easily. I'm not a man who yells. But standing in that room, looking at that treadmill where my wife's easel used to be, I felt something I hadn't felt since the night Margaret was diagnosed. A kind of cold clarity. The feeling of the world rearranging itself into a shape you don't recognize. I turned around and went inside the house. My son and my daughter-in-law had been living with me for 2 years and 4 months. It started the way these things always start, reasonably, even generously. My son, who I'll call by his relationship to me because that's how I've come to think of him in all of this, had lost his job as a project coordinator when his company restructured. My daughter-in-law was between jobs herself, having quit a position she described as toxic. They needed a few months to get back on their feet. I had a 4-bedroom house, and no one to share it with except the quiet. I said yes without hesitating. That was the right decision, I still believe that. A man doesn't close his door to his son. But somewhere between month 3 and month 8, the few months became indefinite. The room that was supposed to be theirs became 2 rooms. The kitchen that was supposed to be shared became one where I often found no space in the refrigerator for my groceries. The driveway that fit 2 cars comfortably fit 3 uncomfortably, and somehow my car was always the one parked at the end, farthest from the door. I charged them rent, $400 a month, which covered approximately nothing in terms of what this house actually costs to run. But it felt important to have the number, to have the agreement. They paid it for the first 5 months. After that, my son said things were tight. They were working on building their savings. Could we revisit the amount? I said, of course. The revisiting never happened. I want to be precise about the finances because I've seen how these situations get told, how they blur into vague accusations of mooching that can be dismissed as a family dispute. So let me be precise. In 2 years and 4 months, my son and daughter-in-law paid me approximately $2,000 in rent, spread across those first 5 months. My mortgage is paid off, so that's not the issue. But my property taxes on this house run just over $8,000 a year. My utilities, gas, electric, water, internet, averaged about $420 a month before they moved in. In the 14 months following their arrival, where I have complete records, those utilities averaged $680 a month. The grocery situation was similar. I'm one person. I've learned to shop for one person. Having 3 people in the house, one of whom is a 29-year-old man who eats the way 29-year-old men eat, changed things considerably. I'm not a man who keeps score in his family, but I am an engineer. Numbers are how I understand the world. They brought 2 cats I didn't know they had. My daughter-in-law explained that they hadn't mentioned the cats because they weren't sure how I'd react, and by the time they arrived with a moving van that contained considerably more than they'd described, the cats were just there, in carriers in the back seat, and it seemed unkind to say anything. One of the cats scratched the baseboard in the hallway that I'd painted the spring before Margaret died. A small thing. I didn't say anything about it. My daughter-in-law had ideas. About the house. She mentioned them in ways that sounded like questions. Have you ever thought about painting the living room? That sage green is a little dated, but that I understood, over time, were not really questions. She had what I can only describe as a confidence about the space, as though living in a house confers the same relationship to it as owning one. She rearranged the furniture in the den without asking, explaining afterward that the old configuration blocked the natural flow. She replaced the hand towels in the guest bathroom with ones she'd ordered online, and folded the old ones into a bag that ended up in my closet. I said nothing about any of it. This is the part that's hardest to explain why I said nothing. It wasn't weakness. It was grief. And it was love. And it was the particular difficulty of asserting yourself inside your own home to someone who is technically your family. Margaret would have known what to do. She'd always been better than me at the human parts of things. The studio was the line. Margaret converted that space the year she retired from teaching. She'd been an art teacher for 27 years, and when she left, she said she finally wanted to paint for herself, instead of always for the lesson. I had the garage insulated and drywalled, and I put in a proper window, north-facing, because she told me that was the right light for a painter's studio. I built the shelves and the pegboard. I ran a separate electrical circuit so she could have good lighting without flickering. It took me most of a summer. She used that studio every day for the last 11 years of her life. Every day that her health allowed. Even near the end, when walking was difficult, I'd bring a chair in from the house, and she'd sit at her easel and work on the coastal series she was planning to donate to the hospital where her oncologist had treated her. She said she wanted something of hers to be in a place where people needed comfort. She passed 22 months ago. Pancreatic cancer. We had 8 months between diagnosis and the end, which is more than many people get, and I am grateful for those 8 months in ways I can't fully put into words. After she was gone, I kept the studio exactly as she'd left it. I wasn't ready to change it. There was a painting on the easel she hadn't finished, a view of Cannon Beach at low tide, the sea stacks rising out of fog, and I couldn't bring myself to move it. The half-used tubes of paint were still on her supply cart. Her apron was still hanging on the hook by the door. When my son and daughter-in-law moved in, I walked them through the house and showed them which rooms were theirs and which were common space. I was direct about the studio. I said, "That room is not to be disturbed." I said, "That was your mother's space, and it stays as it is." My son nodded. He understood. He'd lost his mother too. My daughter-in-law smiled the way people smile when they're agreeing with something they don't actually agree with. I came home from a 4-day fishing trip on a Tuesday afternoon in October. I go every year with 2 friends from my engineering days, up to a cabin on the Deschutes River. Margaret used to tease me that I was the worst fisherman she'd ever seen, that I just liked the excuse to sit by moving water and think. She wasn't wrong. I drove home, pulled into the driveway, noticed an unfamiliar car parked where mine usually went. I thought maybe they had a friend visiting. I got my duffel out of the truck, walked through the side door into the garage. I always enter through the garage and saw that the studio door was open. What followed was the sequence I described at the beginning. The white walls, the foam mats, the treadmill, the complete erasure. I went inside the house. They were both there. My son was on the couch with his laptop. My daughter-in-law was in the kitchen. When I came in, she looked up and smiled with the particular brightness of someone who has been waiting to present something. "We finally tackled the studio," she said. I know it's been hard for you to deal with it, so we thought we'd help. It's going to be our home gym. We're really committed to the New Year's resolution early this time. I looked at her. I looked at my son, who was looking at his laptop screen with a degree of concentration that had nothing to do with whatever was on it. Where are Margaret's paintings? I said. We put them in storage. The canvases and the supplies and everything. It's all safe, don't worry. We got a unit over on Morrison. Easel? That's in there too. The painting that was on the easel. A small pause. That's in there. Everything's in there. The apron on the hook. Dad, my son said, still not looking up. We kept everything. Nothing was thrown away. I told you that room was not to be touched. It's been almost 2 years, my daughter-in-law said, and her tone had shifted slightly, the brightness calibrating towards something more careful. We thought it might actually be good for you to have a fresh start with that space. Holding on to it like a shrine that's not healthy. I want to note that she said the word shrine with a particular emphasis. The emphasis of someone who has said the word to herself many times in private, building a case. That's not your call to make, I said. We live here too, she said. And there it was, the thing that had been building for 2 years and 4 months, finally in the open air between us. No, I said. You stay here. I live here. There's a difference. My son closed his laptop. Dad, let's not make this bigger than it needs to be. Your wife converted your mother's studio into a gym without my permission, in my house. After I specifically told you both not to touch that room, tell me how big this needs to be. You can barely go in there, my daughter-in-law said. It's been 2 years, and you haven't changed anything in that room. You've been stuck. We were trying to help. I'd like to know, I said, who authorized the storage unit, who signed that lease, who moved my wife's belongings. Another small pause. The kind of pause that contains an answer the person would prefer not to give. I arranged it, my daughter-in-law said. It's in my name. I'm paying for it. With what money? It was a direct question. I asked it because I knew the answer, or suspected it, and because the engineer in me requires the numbers to be stated plainly. With our money, she said. We have money. We've been saving. How much do you have in savings right now? That's not. Because I've been thinking, I said, for some time now, about the fact that you've lived in my house for 2 years and 4 months. And in that time I can account for $2,000 in rent paid in the first 5 months. I cannot account for what you've been saving toward. I'd like to understand the math. My son stood up. Dad, this isn't the time. When is the time? You tell me when the time is, because I've been waiting for you to name it. What came next was the thing my son said that I keep returning to. He said, you have this big house, and you're alone in it. What's the point of all this space if you're just going to guard it like it's a museum? I'm going to let that sit for a moment, the way I let it sit in that kitchen. Then I said, I want you to understand something. This house is not a resource. It's not a square footage problem to be solved. It belonged to your mother, and it belongs to me. And the decisions about what happens inside it are mine. That's not selfishness. That's what it means to own a home. My daughter-in-law said, we have a right to make this feel like our home too. No, I said. You don't. You have a right to the room you were given and the common areas we agreed to share. You don't have a right to my wife's studio, and I want Margaret's things back in that room by the end of the week. What happened next is the part of this that I had not anticipated. My daughter-in-law said, I don't think that's going to work for us. She said it calmly, with a kind of finality that suggested she and my son had discussed what to do if this conversation happened, which meant they had, at some point, considered the possibility that I would object to what they'd done, which meant they'd done it anyway, with that knowledge. We've actually been talking, she said, about what our situation is here, and we think that given how long we've been here, and how much we've contributed to the household, it would be fair for us to have more of a say in how the space is used. I looked at my son. He said, we've looked into it, Dad, legally, regarding tenant rights. And there it was. The phrase I'd hoped never to hear in my own house from my own son, tenant rights. I'm an engineer, not a lawyer, but I'd been in real estate adjacent enough over my career to know that this was not an idle phrase. I knew what it meant for someone who had been living in a property for 2 years, receiving mail there, having their name on utility accounts. I knew this was a conversation that needed to happen differently than it was happening in a different room with different participants. So I said, I see. All right. I went upstairs. I closed my bedroom door. I called my attorney. Her name is Patricia, and she's been my attorney for 15 years, estate planning, the firm sale, various property matters. She picked up on the second ring, which is one of the many reasons I've kept her for 15 years. I told her what I'd come home to. I told her what had been said about tenant rights. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Give me 24 hours." In those 24 hours, I did 3 things. First, I went to the storage unit. My daughter-in-law had told me which facility, and the unit was in her name, which meant I couldn't access it directly. But I drove there anyway, and sat in the parking lot for a while, just needing to be close to it, knowing that somewhere in one of those orange doors were Margaret's paintings, her brushes in their mason jars, her apron with the cadmium yellow stain on the left pocket that she could never fully get out, the unfinished Cannon Beach painting. Second, I went through my records. I am meticulous about records. It's the engineering habit. I had every bank statement, every utility bill, every grocery receipt I'd kept in the household folder. I built a spreadsheet that laid out, month by month, what my son and daughter-in-law had and hadn't contributed since they'd arrived. The $2,000 in rent, the utilities delta, the grocery estimates, the cost of the storage unit they'd taken out in connection with my wife's belongings. Third, I called my son's uncle, Margaret's younger brother, Frank, who lives about 40 minutes from here and who has known my son since he was born. I didn't call to recruit an ally. I called because Frank deserved to know what was happening, and because he had given my son and daughter-in-law a loan 18 months earlier, $6,000, toward what had been described to him as a down payment fund, and I wanted Frank to know the current shape of things. Frank was quiet on the phone for a long time after I told him. Then he said, "They told me they had $12,000 in savings, that they were close." I told him what my son had said about tenant rights. Frank said some things that I won't repeat because they're between family. But before he hung up, he said, "What do you need from me?" I said I didn't need anything. I just needed him to know. Patricia called me the next morning. She laid out the situation clearly, the way good attorneys do without dramatics. She said that yes, my son and daughter-in-law had accrued certain protections under Oregon tenancy law by virtue of the duration of their stay, regardless of the informal nature of the arrangement. She said the process for formally addressing this was straightforward but required specific steps and specific timing. She said she would prepare a formal notice, not an eviction, not yet, but a formal written notice that established the terms of their tenancy and my expectations going forward, and that set a clock. She also said, "Do you want to include the studio in the notice?" I said yes. I wanted it in writing that that room was to be restored to its prior state and that Margaret's belongings were to be returned from storage at their expense. The notice was served 4 days later. The reaction in the house that evening was significant. My daughter-in-law did not speak to me. My son came to my study. I was sitting at my desk, reading, or trying to read, and he sat down across from me and said, quietly, that he thought this was an overreaction. I put down my book. "Let me ask you something," I said. "What would your mother think of what's happened in her studio?" He didn't answer. "She asked me to build that room for her," I said. "I spent a summer building it. She painted in it every day she was able to. She died with an unfinished painting on the easel in that room, and your wife decided it would make a better gym." "She was trying to help," he said. "She thought, I know what she thought. She told me, she thinks I've been stuck. She may even be right about that. But being stuck is something I get to work through on my own terms, in my own time, in my own house. That's not something anyone else gets to fix without asking me first." My son looked at his hands. He's 41 years old, and in that moment he looked much younger than that, and much older at the same time. "I don't know how we got here," he said. "I think you do," I said. "I think it happened slowly, the way these things do, a little at a time, until it was a lot." He was quiet for a while, then, "Where are we supposed to go?" "That's something you should have been working on for the past 2 years," I said. "I can give you 60 days. Patricia's notice gives you 30, but I'm giving you 60, because you're my son, and I love you, and 60 days is enough time to find a rental, if you're actually looking. 60 days, he said. And the studio is restored before you leave. Everything comes back from storage. That's not negotiable. He nodded slowly. He didn't argue. Something had shifted in him during that conversation. I don't know exactly what, but I saw it happen. What I didn't anticipate was my daughter-in-law's next move. 3 days after the notice was served, I came downstairs in the morning to find her parents sitting at my kitchen table. They had driven up from Medford, a 4-hour drive, without calling, without warning, without being invited. Her father is a large man, a former contractor, with the particular confidence of someone accustomed to being the biggest presence in any room. Her mother sat with her hands folded and said nothing. Her father stood up when I came in. He said, "We need to have a talk about how you're treating our daughter." I got myself a cup of coffee. I offered them coffee. Her mother said yes. Her father said no, then changed his mind and said yes. I sat down at my own kitchen table. Her father laid out his position. His daughter was pregnant. This was the first I was hearing of it, and I processed it without showing anything on my face, because that is a skill I've developed, and he was not going to stand by while she was pushed out of her home in that condition. He used the phrase "her home" twice. He said I was being unreasonable, that family didn't treat family this way, that his daughter had done nothing but try to make things better around here. I asked him, "Did she tell you about the studio?" He said she'd mentioned the room, yes. I asked him if she'd told him that I'd explicitly asked for that room not to be touched. He looked at his daughter. She looked at the table. "Families share spaces," he said. "Things change. You can't keep a room frozen because of grief." "You're right," I said. "I can't keep it frozen forever, but I get to decide when it changes and how it changes. That room is in my house. It was my wife's room. I built it for her. Those decisions belong to me. You're going to put my pregnant daughter out on the street. I'm giving them 60 days, which is 30 more than required by law. That's not the street. That's 2 months to make arrangements. She's pregnant. I'm aware. I've been sitting here for the last 30 seconds being aware of it. I drank some coffee. I'll also say this. If you're concerned about where she'll be living when the baby comes, I'd ask why that concern is arriving at my table rather than arriving as an offer from you. The table was quiet. "You drove 4 hours," I said. "You're clearly able to help. You're clearly motivated to help. The question of why helping means pressuring me rather than opening your own home to your daughter, that's a question worth asking." Her father didn't have an answer for that. He looked at his wife. His wife unfolded her hands and folded them again. Daughter-in-law. They left an hour later. I don't think it went the way my daughter-in-law had hoped. What happened in the following weeks was quieter than I'd expected. My son, to his credit, started doing the things he should have been doing for 2 years. He updated his resume. He had phone interviews. He and my daughter-in-law started looking at rentals. And I know this because my son showed me listings without being asked. The way someone shows you something when they want you to see that they're trying. The studio restoration happened 3 weeks before they left. My daughter-in-law arranged for the storage unit to be delivered a moving service with a small truck, and I stayed out of the way while they carried everything back in. I wasn't ready to watch it happen. I sat in the backyard and listened to the sounds of it. When it was done, my son came out and sat with me. "She's in there," he said. I went in alone. It wasn't quite right. The furniture was in the wrong positions. The paintings weren't where they'd been. The mason jars of brushes were grouped differently. But it was all there. The apron on the hook. The unfinished Cannon Beach painting, which someone I don't know who had wrapped carefully in brown paper for the move and placed back on the easel, still wrapped. I stood in that room for a long time. Then I unwrapped the painting. Margaret had been working on the sea stacks, the ones that stand just offshore at Cannon Beach, the ones that look like they've always been there and always will be. She'd gotten the rock formations right, the way the light came off the water at low tide. She'd sketched in the fog but hadn't painted it yet. The upper third of the canvas was still bare gesso, waiting. I don't know if I'll finish it. I don't know if that's mine to do. But I've started going into the room again in the mornings, just to sit, just to be in the light she chose. My son and daughter-in-law moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood about 12 minutes from here. They moved out on a Saturday and I helped them carry boxes, because that's what fathers do. The baby is due in April. I don't know exactly what my relationship with that child will look like. I hope it's a good one. I intend to do my part to make it so. But there are things I need my son to understand, and because it's hard to say them in a conversation, because conversations allow for interruption and deflection, and the normal evasions of human beings talking to each other, I wrote them in a letter instead. I put the letter in an envelope, and I left it on his pillow on his last night in the house, and I went for a drive so I wouldn't be there when he read it. I'll tell you what I wrote. I wrote, "I love you without condition, and I have loved you since before you were a person, since you were a possibility." That doesn't change. I wrote, "What happened in this house over the past 2 years wasn't your fault alone. I let it go on too long. I didn't say the things I should have said. I thought love meant not asking. I know better now." I wrote, "Your mother would not have let it go on as long as I did. She was better at the hard conversations. I've spent 2 years wishing I could ask her how to do this, and missing her, and not being ready to change the room where I missed her most. That's not a character flaw, it's just grief. Grief is slow and it's not convenient for anyone, and I'm sorry that it made things harder." I wrote, "I'm not asking you to choose between your father and your wife. I'm asking you to remember that your father is a person with a house and a life and a room where your mother used to paint, and that those things are real and they have weight, and a person who loves you would know that without having to be told." I wrote, "I'll be at your door in April, with whatever the baby needs, and with whatever you need, because that's what I am. I'm your father. I just needed you to see that being your father doesn't mean having no self left over." The next morning, the house was quiet in a way it hadn't been for 2 years and 4 months. My coffee was still where I'd left it. The refrigerator had exactly what I'd put in it. When I walked into the garage and looked at the studio door, it was closed, the way I'd left it, and behind it was a room that was not a gym. I'm 63 years old. I'm retired. My wife is gone and my son has moved out, and the house has more quiet in it than I know what to do with. Some days. But I went into the studio that morning and I opened the window for the first time since October, the north-facing window, and I sat in the chair I'd brought in from the kitchen, and I looked at the unfinished painting on the easel, and the morning light came in the way Margaret always said it should: flat, steady, without drama. And I thought, this is what she meant. This is exactly what she meant. And for the first time in a long time, the quiet didn't feel like something that had been done to me. It felt like mine.